All right, welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Dr. Lisa, we're never short of topics to talk about, are we?
Oh no, nope, nope. We've got a long conveyor belt of topics. Hi everyone.
Oh,
Pronoun she hers. Yeah, we got a lot to talk about, so I think we should just go ahead and jump right into our word of the week that is or concept of the week even that's super
mm,
relevant. So what have you got for us?
mhm. Yes, well, I think you and I both are very naturally uh pragmatist in many
Mhm.
ways. It's like, this is what we're dealing with. How are we going to strategize around it? And so when it comes to folks that are overly positive or overly pie in the sky or, oh, everything's going to be okay, we seem like we're the rain cloud
Mhm.
over the
Mhm.
sunshine, right? When actually we're just trying to play the cards that we're dealt most of the time. And so I thought it was really important for us to talk about this notion, or actually two notions, of toxic hope and toxic positivity. Now,
Mhm.
I'm sure you and I, Lisa, we have talked about toxic positivity more than
Yep.
once
Yep.
on this podcast. We just have not necessarily defined it. But when it comes to a actual definition, psychology today defines it as negative emotions like sadness, anger, disappointment. Those emotions sound very interesting right now, Lisa,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
applicable. But negative emotions, whether they're ours or someone else's, that can be hard to process and uncomfortable to discuss. And so, toxic positivity is this mental shortcut that allows us to avoid experiencing or talking about these difficult feelings. And so, it's kind of a detour around discomfort, if you will, when it
Mhm.
comes to
Okay.
that. And so, when you think about that, hold that in your mind for a minute, a detour around negative feelings and so forth. Toxic hope to me is quite different, related, but different. In that toxic hope is this part of us that keeps us stuck in situations, especially bad situations, because we're telling ourselves stories that we choose to believe that keep us from confronting it, right? And so once again, we're still avoiding, but we're actively telling these stories that are the workarounds. And so it kind of reminds me, Lisa, of we've seen this meme many times before on social media, where there's this little cartoon character that's sitting in the middle of a huge dumpster fire that keeps saying, everything's okay, everything's okay, everything's okay. And so for me, I think it's interesting that it's one thing if we have these emotions that we believe, but it's another thing when we put it into action. And so for me, that, toxic positivity piece, it's an avoidance mechanism that to me seems to be very internal and mental and even sometimes intellectual. Whereas toxic hope is when we start spreading it around. Lisa, I know that 9 out of 10 people in your DEI department got let go at 5 o'clock yesterday, but you're going to be okay. It's like, well, I would love for that to be true, but the pragmatist would say it's probably not true. So, Lisa, how can I help you strategize on your next steps? You and I are the pragmatist people that are like,
Mhm.
not looking too good for you, girl. What can we do to support you to move forward? Right. And so I just, for me, I think the conundrum, especially as more of a pragmatist, and I've even called myself a hopeful pragmatist, but as a pragmatist, I think both of these concepts keep us from, number one, facing the reality and the information that's in front of us. And I think I'm trying not to use ableist language, Lisa. It keeps us from moving forward.
Mhm.
And so that's my problem with it, is that the acceptance of what we're in and what we're going through as the American people, it's like, accept it and now let's strategize versus acting as if it's not real.
Yeah, okay. So I see a lot of this right now, this toxic hope and toxic positivity. I had heard of obviously the positivity side of this because we've talked about it, but toxic hope was a new thing for me. I mean, I always do have
Mm-mm.
this flame of hope, right? It's a little flicker. It's like a little pilot light. It doesn't go out, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
people aren't going to make that dumb decision and then they do. But I feel like if my little single flame were to be extinguished,
Mm.
I don't know that that would be a healthy thing.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing though. I think both of us have that pilot light. It's just a matter of how it shows up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, it may be that Lisa's pilot light is still flickering and thinking that okay, it's only one step to where we want to be, where Shauna's pilot light is saying there's probably 20 steps to where we want to be, but I still think we can get there. You and
Yeah.
I both think we can get there, but maybe I overestimate the number of steps it's going to take. You may underestimate. I'm not sure, depending on the topic. And so there's still hope, but it's just like, man, what's the distance, right? So my hope is a little bit of a shorter wick, if you will.
Okay, so having pilot light hope is not toxic hope.
I don't know. I don't think it is because
Okay.
I think the toxic hope is the little cartoon character sitting in the flames. It's
Mm-hmm.
all around them. It's encompassing them because I don't think the pilot light blocks our larger vision of where we can be and where we can go. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the conundrum is that the larger toxic hope is all around and it blocks you from the reality of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
That concerns me because then that means that if your longer term hope or vision is blocked, then you never strategize. You just sit there waiting for whatever you want to happen to just magically occur and it's not going to be magic.
Mm. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. We don't have time to keep going on
Yeah.
this, but you're making me think of this podcast I listened to related to this really bad
Mm,
airplane crash in Tenerife back in the 70s, I think. And
mhm.
many people died and they didn't need to, but they froze and they forgot how to undo their seatbelt and things like that. Um, and so I
Mhm.
wonder to what degree that kind of like traumatization influences a person sitting amid a dumpster fire and just being hopeful that someone will come rescue them, for example, right? Like to
Oh,
add
oh,
another
oh,
layer
oh, oh,
there,
oh,
which
oh.
maybe that's an unpacking at another time, but that's where I went just then when you were talking. Yeah.
Oh, you know what? There's another story very similar to that of a F1 driver that was also in a crash and the flames were just overtaking him. And he too was thinking, oh, their safety, their security, people are going to come get me finally out of this car. And he waited for so long and it was getting so warm that he's like, I just lost hope that anybody was coming to get me. So I got to figure this out. Now, after a very long period of time, like maybe 2.5 minutes or so of flames like bursting everywhere, everybody's watching this crash thinking that there is no way in hell that this person actually survived. And he literally walks away from this
Mm,
crash.
mm-hmm.
And so that tipping point of when do I help myself? When do I start figuring this
Right.
out?
Right.
I think that's the tipping point right there. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
enough on the toxic hope and positivity. I think there's a lot of tipping points we're going to have over the next 4 years here. So we'll
Yeah.
see.
Agreed. Agreed.
But anyway, let's get into phase one. So phase one, again, not surprising, but we have Costco resisting DEI rollback policies. And that's so funny because rollback is more so of a Walmart term, if you will. But Costco is resisting. Yay, we're going to continue to shop there, hopefully. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but, we have this second DEI executive order coming down that started to target private companies such as Costco and others. I think what's interesting is paying attention to who shores up their DEI work and who
Mm-hmm.
abandons it entirely. And Lisa, you and I have a consistent voice around watching who's going to be faithful to the DEI cause and who's not. We have said this since what, 2020 probably, when
Yep.
it
Yep.
comes to these topics. And so, from the inception of this podcast, frankly, because Freddie Gray was a really easy way to start thinking about who's going to support, who's going to fold. And so, anyhow, we have an entire list of companies that have said, you know what? We still support DEI. We're not going to be fair weather friends. We're going to continue to not only support DEI because it's the right thing to do, but there were a couple of companies that I really enjoyed reading their business case that gave very clear data in support of how DEI has done nothing but make them a better business. And so, with that, we have Microsoft, we have Apple, Pinterest, Adobe, McKinsey, Delta, Nike, JP Morgan Chase,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the more recent ones that I looked at was e.l.f. Beauty. And so they got into the details of their business strategy around their sales growth, 23 consecutive quarters of sales growth, and their stock increased by more than 700% over the past 5 years that they've been implementing their DEI strategy. And here's the thing that really gets me, Lisa, because I've seen a lot of posts on LinkedIn and so forth around implementing DEI. It doesn't have to be named DEI to be implemented as those principles. And so that's
Right.
exactly
Right.
what e.l.f. Beauty has done, is that they don't even have a DEI team. It just shows up and is baked in, as we usually say, baked into their commitments and their priorities, whether it's hiring, whether it's their employee demographics, which are now, about 75% women and 40% people of color. All of that has really folded in the principles of DEI without explicitly um, using the language that has now been politicized, Lisa. So, they even have models for the company that are trans and non-binary. So these are things that I think we should applaud and take note of, Lisa, given that we know that this divide is going to keep happening. Who's going to shore up and who's going to fold? We'll
Right,
see.
right. I think the challenge is, even though they are not even naming it as such, that the executive orders and the kind of venomous attacks on DEI are such that they're even looking for behaviors or policies or practices that go by another name but essentially do the
Yes,
same thing.
yes.
Um,
And have
and
always done the same thing.
Right, right. And
You
so
know,
this, we might be thinking about executive orders only apply to government, but that second DEI one is going beyond federal contracting, and it's actually asking the federal government to look into private sector DEI initiatives, and they have to each agency has to come up with 9 potential civil compliance investigations to identify the most egregious one, right? So there's not for enforcement, there's not anything they can really do around private companies if they're not receiving federal funding. But the threat of this has obviously impacted a number of companies, McDonald's, Walmart, etc., because they have rolled back their DEI. Target is rolling back their DEI, right? So I think in light of that, the risk that these companies that you read off here is higher, right? Because they're not bending a knee.
that's right. That's right.
So, but I don't think e.l.f. is. I think they're at risk still potentially, even if they're not naming it as such. Like I don't
Hmm.
think they're going to
Hmm.
be exempt from this.
Oh, no, not at all. And again, the how can I say, the seeking out, someone has even named these witch hunts basically. But for
Yeah.
those that are aggressively seeking out this type of work. So for example, your mention of Target, we've talked about Target extensively on this podcast and other episodes, and looking even onto their page, that their pages used to be specifically DEI, and now some things have been cleaned up, but a lot of language that was there previously has now been labeled belonging, right? Well, there's going to be someone at some point that
Mm-hmm.
picks up on the change in language. And so then what becomes the newly targeted language, no pun intended? What's going to end up being the new language that is, oh, we need to watch out for this, we need to watch out for
Yep.
that. Um, so anything about equality, anything about equity, anything about belonging, anything about identity, some of the words that roll off our tongue all the time, Lisa, are going to be words that are now going to be, what's the opposite of, is it dog whistle? I don't think that's the right word for it. They're going to be, they're in some way going to draw people to question, even if it's something that's not DEI related. And that's
Right.
the concern, is like, oh, are we truly attracting more attention? And how do you not attract more attention without abandoning all this work entirely?
Well, and also framing DEI as like these programs that just provide like racial preference,
Mm-hmm.
which
Mm-hmm.
isn't even half of it, right? I mean, I don't
Of
agree that it's
course.
racial preference to begin with, but
That's
we're
right.
talking
That's right.
about gender, we're talking about ability, we're talking about um, income. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
different ways that creating an inclusive and diverse workspace goes well beyond race. I mean, and you've got the Americans with Disabilities Act, right, where there are requirements
That's right.
around workplaces to create accessibility, but accessibility is now suddenly a bad word. I
That's
mean,
right. That's right.
so what? You can't provide a ramp for someone who uses a wheelchair? Like that's a bit of a kind of like bang you on the head example, but
Right, 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 right.
is that's now off the table?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the people that it affects is not the people you thought it would affect. It's
Right.
like, I think, it's, oh, I so avoid trying to name things as unintentional outcomes, yet I still think
Mm-hmm.
they're intentional outcomes. Like,
Right.
I want to keep these folks out. Oh, well, by the way, you're keeping all of these throngs of other people out as
Yep.
well.
Yep.
So what you thought was going to bolster your position actually doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that ends up being those unintended outcomes. Like the petty in me, Lisa, has been just sitting back and watching all these posts from people who non-DEI professionals would think, oh, how would they have anything to do with DEI? And all of a sudden they are directly affected with their livelihood. Their livelihood. So
Right.
white women, children, all the people that have always been the largest benefactors of many of the principles of DEI now are being shut out. And so you see these folks who also happen to be 45 supporters, 47 supporters saying, hey, I know this was an unintended outcome, but I lost my job in this branch of the government. I need you to do something about it. No, you did something about it when you went to the ballot box. You
Right. Right.
so, making it clear whose responsibility it is, and the frustration it very it kind of reminds me of my boys, Lisa, when, and this has happened before. Let's say one of them did something that they weren't supposed to do. So now everybody has to pay, right? So,
Okay.
Trey, you didn't clean your room, so we as a family are not going for ice cream, and looking at Kendrick's face. Kendrick's face is all of our faces. Like his famous phrase is, "What did I do, Mom?" He didn't do anything other than being guilty by association. You are a citizen of the country of the gold household. Many of us are experiencing this where we feel like we did the best for the collective, but
Right.
unfortunately, we're stuck with consequences that we did not want. And now here we are.
Here
So,
we are.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyway, Lisa, I think just to wrap this particular phase up, we're going to continue to see, as we say scripturally, we're going to see the difference between the wheat and the chaff here. We're going to see a difference between those who continue to be supporters and who don't, who
Mm-hmm.
doesn't, and those that don't. Um, to, here's the long-term vision, Lisa, that we need to think about, just like we did when we first started this podcast. Who jumps off the DEI bandwagon because they're
Yeah.
afraid and they don't have the courage that you brought up, and then later down the line, who tries to jump back on.
Yeah.
We're watching. We're watching.
We're watching for sure. All right, so let's do phase 2, which is a continuation, really, of phase 1.
Yes, it is. You're right. You're right.
We wanted to talk about executive orders and specifically around retaliation. I do just want to say one overarching thing with these executive orders is the speed at which they have been coming out over the last several weeks, particularly in the first week of the presidency, is intentional. It is designed to
Yes,
create
yes,
panic
yes.
and chaos. And so we don't then spend a lot of time because we're moving from one catastrophe to the other. So the pardoning of Jan 7, no, Jan 6,
Uh-huh.
of the Jan 6 folks is now forgotten because it has been supplanted with a bunch of other heinous executive orders, right? So that is
That's right.
strategic and intentional. And if we are not alert to that as people who can resist, then they're winning, right? So um there it's about attention and the degree to which they can maintain a rapid pace of attention because we cannot
That's
focus on
right.
something for more than 30 seconds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um
That's right.
but so some of the things you might have missed, right, is related to this
Yes.
retaliation. One of
Yeah.
the one of the pieces I just want to say right up top is that there was a memo that went out to all federal agencies basically asking federal employees to snitch essentially on their coworkers who might be trying to shoehorn or backdoor DEIA initiatives, but under a different name. And they created an email for this, Shaunna, and the email is DEIA truth at whatever the government agency is. I mean, it's just so, it's funny if it weren't so terrifying and kind of McCarthyism like, right? DEIA truth. I mean,
Yeah. Yep.
seriously.
Yeah. Ridiculous.
It's like out of Big Brother. It feels like it is Big Brother. I mean, we've made the George Orwell reference before. It's very Orwellian.
Yeah. Yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
but thinking about why executive orders are used, right? They're a way essentially to kind of flex executive power to go around Congress because they don't require any kind of congressional approval. They can be overturned by lawmakers, although that doesn't happen very often. And I'm pretty sure it won't happen in our current climate. Um, and the courts are also a stop, right, for executive orders that kind of exceed the legal authority of the executive branch. And we did just see that a few weeks ago with birthright citizenship, where a judge basically shut that government lawyer down in terms of the constitutionality of reneging on birthright citizenship when it's plainly in the Constitution. Um, and so I think we're going to see more challenges in the courts. And in some cases, I think this is also intentional. I think there is a desire for some of these executive actions to be so out of the bounds of what we might consider normal, is that it creates lawsuits so that the Trump administration can then challenge laws and constitutional provisions that they don't agree with, right? Because they think the Supreme Court is in their pocket. So time will tell on that. But there were a couple of examples in the 90s. George H.W. Bush wanted to establish a human fetal tissue bank for scientific research, which actually is very surprising to me that a Bush would want to do that. But that got essentially overturned by Congress, who passed a measure saying that it won't have any legal effect. And there was another example of this during the Korean War with Harry Truman, too, related to Congress intervening and the Supreme Court intervening there, too. Outside of those interventions, which I think will be few and far between, these executive orders are creating a culture of fear, right? And you mentioned in the first phase around employees losing their jobs, right? And
Yeah,
that's sometimes understood as retaliation. When we
that's
think
right.
about an employer taking an action, um, because an employee is saying, I have these rights, these are protected
Mm-hmm.
rights.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
so some of those inspector generals who got fired at night, like on a Friday night,
Mm-hmm.
there's
Mm-hmm.
there's legal protections and provisions that in terms of employment law that they're now all pursuing, right? And so
Right, right,
it's almost like retaliation backwards. It's like the firing of the inspector generals was done in retaliation, and
right.
now but they hadn't yet done the action of trying to hold the government accountable, but that was anticipated. Oh, and then the other
That's
one,
right. Preemptive retaliation.
yeah.
Preemptive retaliation.
And then
Yeah.
all those people at the Justice Department that were related
Mm-hmm.
and part of the investigation of the current president, they've all been booted
Yes.
out.
Yes. Yes.
That's
Yes.
retaliation. That's retaliation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
For any
so
other
yeah.
employee, for any other supervisor that would be an employee of any organization in the United States of America, these
Mm-hmm.
actions would be considered retaliation.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
they just in any other setting, it would be considered retaliation.
So it's like the executive orders are
Mm-hmm.
grabbing our attention, moving us from one to the next, which means we're missing some of
Yes,
these
yes,
nuances. And I think part of the nuances that we're missing is the degree to which they create a structure that enables retaliation and
that's right.
enables this snitching, right? So
Yes, yes.
snitching may not be retaliation in the kind of EEOC sense, but let's say Shauna pisses me off at
Mm-hmm.
work, right? And I'm like, oh, I'm just going to email that DEIA truth at
Right,
blankety blank, right? And I'm going to say that
right.
Shauna has been doing some nefarious stuff. She has been doing equity work that does not align with the Trump administration's anti discrimination policies and get Shauna into a whole load of shit, right? And risk her job.
Just made it easier. Just made it easier
Yeah.
to throw. Look, this is there are two visuals that I thought about, Lisa, as you were explaining that was, oh, just make it much easier for people to throw each other under the bus for any reason, even if they're completely opposite and apart from DEI, which it's hard to do, period. But if you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about the DEI political agenda, oh, look how far away we are, but I still have an easy way to retaliate against you. That's one thing. And then for those that love Pixar or anything of that nature, this reminds me of all the Minion movies where they have this very sinister professor called Dr. Nefario, nefariously doing his work behind the
Mm.
scenes and having his minions to do this work. And that's what that reminds me of is that we have a Dr. Nefario that's running lots of things, including the country, that allows and empowers, in fact, the minions to do the dirty work.
Yeah, and it's all being done by fiat, by executive order, right? And
That's
they
right.
if and the
That's right.
likelihood that anyone in Congress at least is going to stand up against that is unlikely. And so this culture of fear and what, like you said, what would be considered retaliation in any other context, it's being
Yeah.
encouraged.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so that's what makes this even scarier, obviously, for lots of people, those that are directly affected losing their jobs, but also at the same time, you know, I've been in situations where I've done trainings or at least reviews around retaliation, and almost every form of retaliation is here. Every form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the point of retaliation is to kind of get your lick back in regard to you did this thing against me, so I need to do this thing against you. And it also can be preemptive retaliation where I think you're going to do this towards me, so I'm going to get my lick first.
Yeah.
And it's starting to be codified through executive orders. And so, for me, I just the tizzy with which these executive orders have come barreling towards us should give us pause, at least for two reasons. One, the speed at which one is
Mm-hmm.
being distracted
Mm-hmm.
and creating hysteria. So the speed at which, but then the content as at which, because Lisa, I'm thinking about, because you've reminded me, you've been very good at holding me accountable for thinking about the individuals who aren't as educated on any of these topics. Hell, they may not be as educated on how executives work, how executive orders work, what they are, what they do, what they don't do. And so even the intimation that this might be happening
Mm-hmm.
gets people so upset that they assume that this is final, official, and not to be changed, reverted back, or vetted. And so it is a manipulative power play. And we
Yeah.
know this is a manipulative power play, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's I read this thing one time where the parent is, this was a tired parent, but basically they I think they turned a movie on like Spanish instead of English or something like that. And the kid was so afraid that they had forgotten English that they just worked themselves up into a tizzy and they started running around the house until finally they put themselves to sleep.
Right.
Tell me that's not what's happening right now. It
Mm-hmm.
we're being manipulated into working ourselves up into either it's so much or we don't understand or both
Yep.
that finally we're going to get to the place where we lay down and just allow this shit to happen to us. And that's where resistance needs to come in.
Yeah. I mean, I think to some degree that's already happening,
Oh, for
honestly,
sure.
right?
I think it was happening before. I think it was
Yeah.
happening before where people were preemptively,
Yeah.
let's get rid of this, let's get rid of that, let's
Yeah.
tone this down. Well, he's coming in, so he's not going to allow that. You're right. I think it was happening well before that. Absolutely.
Yeah, the bending of the knee, right? To, I mean, like
Hmm.
ABC or Disney paying that one, I forget how many millions of dollars they gave to the Trump Presidential Library to settle a lawsuit that they probably would have won, right? But they're just bending the
Hmm.
knee. And then CNN, like Jim Acosta, who was um, a journalist, a newscaster person. I can't think of the exact news anchor. That's what I'm looking for, right? He had gotten his White House credentials taken away in the last Trump administration. Anyway, CNN moved him to a midnight slot a few weeks ago. And because there, and you don't, that's a demotion, right? No one watches at midnight, right? It's like
That's
the
right.
lowest
That's right.
time viewership, right? So
That's right.
that is a preemptive kind of
Hmm.
preventing him from causing trouble. So he probably won't be at CNN for a whole lot longer if he hasn't
Oh,
already resigned. So yeah,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. So, and the tizzy of like I even had to control my own tizzy around like the IG firings and so forth
mm-hmm,
on,
mm-hmm,
overnight on a Friday night. Even that creates anxiety of, again, just like we did during the first term, waking up to what? Like, what's the damage report this morning? Because something happened
right.
overnight while we all were trying to get a few winks, and now it's another tizzy and another tizzy. And so, with that, I've been trying to use this example with my friends of having the having the calm and steady of a pilot on a very turbulent flight. That's what I've been trying to have because the tizzy does not work for me. I mean, I will get so upset that it's like, okay, it's time to go lay down.
Yeah,
And I know that in fact is a strategy that's being used against those of us who
yeah,
are doing good work. And I don't want to buy into it even though I see it around
right,
me. That's
right.
that's my concern there. So
Yeah. All right. Well, beware retaliation.
mhm.
Read the small print and pay attention as best you can with this, the speed of these changes because that's how things will get past us. Um,
Absolutely.
so let's move on to phase 3 here.
All right. So phase three is the ultimate pivot that we probably should discuss because, Lisa, I'm in DI work for the long haul. Lots of different iterations of it and changes of it has occurred since I started my career in this area. So not going anywhere. Um, and at the very same time, I respect those that are like, let's jump out of this burning building. Gotta go. And so with that, I thought it would be important as a topic to bring up that ultimate pivot of, do you want to stay in DEI? Do
Mm-hmm.
you want to
Mm-hmm.
leave DEI, or do you want to continue to just recover from what we're experiencing here in DEI? Because I have to admit, I spent a few years recovering from the first 45 term. And so that was an entire process. And so there is a wonderful consultant on LinkedIn that we'll link you to, you all, that wrote an article entitled "Why I Stepped Away from the Best Job I'd Ever Had and the Long-Term Implications of Moving Away from DEI to Appease Bullies," right? And I really loved a visual that her name is Dr. Sam. Dr. Sam pulled together in regard to those of us who are doing this work right now. We are probably experiencing some phase of her DEI practitioner life cycle where and Lisa, as I'm going through these really quickly, just take a moment to reflect where you might be somewhere
Okay.
in this
Okay.
visual here.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about it too, but the first phase is we enter the field, we're passionate, we're, kind of like that, happy little puppy that's so excited, right? And so, that's the first phase. But then the second phase is that we realize that a lot of companies, a lot of organizations are performative and really don't care. As someone who's been seasoned for a while now, that's been like my ultimate question of younger
Mm-hmm.
DEI practitioners, is that does it matter if it's performative or not, as long
Right.
as it gets done. So, and
Yeah.
and they rarely have a quick answer to that question. So,
Mm-hmm.
performative. Phase three, trying to go up the ranks in the field, whether you're trying to move up to a vice president, senior vice
Mm-hmm.
president, possibly a chief diversity officer. So you're trying to climb the ladder. Phase four, you start to burn out. And so you're constantly advocating for everything, the resources and all the different ways they can show up, whether it's money, whether it's people in power and their buy-in, which then influences other people. You're seeking more to do what you want to do. Stage five, then you start to job hop, hoping that other companies can offer better. That's interesting. Look, that may be where the toxic positivity and toxic hope comes in, is that there's got
Ooh,
to be greener
yeah.
grass. Got to
Yep.
be
Yep.
greener grass somewhere, right, Lisa? So that may be stage five for you. Six is you decide to try consulting. Ding, 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 ding. Here we go. That was me, what, 5 years ago? Um, decide to try consulting, and maybe they'll listen to you if you're external. Ooh, they're all up in my house, Lisa. They're all up in my house right now. So, and using that leverage of outsider insider status. Phase seven, you realize consulting has its own hurdles and you still have to constantly advocate. Hello. Stage eight, you choose between going back to an internal role or another field entirely. And then we're back to phase one. And so, Lisa, I just want to kind of support and, think through anybody that's at any point, whether you're going to stay and you're firmly rooted and grounded, you're leaving, exit stage left for whatever reasons. It may be because of this administration, it may be because of other reasons, but it's time for you to exit. Or maybe you're recovering from DEI experiences and you're trying to figure out your next steps. I think these phases are really cool. Of course, with any visual or any, visual interpretation of lived experience, we can always tweak and change. But Lisa, where might you see yourself? I'm
Mm-hmm.
afraid to ask. I'm afraid to.
Yeah, I think somewhere probably 6 or 7. Um, I didn't
Yes.
really try to go up the ranks to VP or chief diversity officer or anything like that, but some of the other
Uh-huh.
ones do resonate with me. And obviously, I'm a consultant, so I must be at least at 6. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I do think still
Yeah.
that external consultants can move the needle in a way that internal um employees are not able to. And the other thing is, you get a client, they're performative, whatever, you're doing the work, but they're not your employer in the sense that you're not there permanently. So you do your 6 months and then you're gone, right? So consulting in that sense for me, I suppose, is a little akin to the job hopping. but differently so, right? But you're client hopping because you have to as a consultant, but it means that you're never there long enough for that burnout or damage to really set in. Um, and what is interesting here about 8, choose between going back to an internal role or into another field, and then 1, enter the field with tons of passion. I don't think that 8 becomes 1, because if you've gone through that whole cycle and you're like, do
Yes,
I go back
yes.
to an internal role? You don't then go back to an internal role with a ton of passion, because at that point you're jaded and tired, right? So I feel like there's something, it's not cyclical. It's like you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And
Yeah.
then it feels like there needs to be another, like a secondary life cycle for people who are coming back around. Um,
Ooh, okay,
you
okay.
know,
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
unless you're going back to an internal role in a different field, then I could see you might enter
Yes.
that field with a ton of passion. But this is a DEI practitioner life cycle, so it wouldn't really, that whole thing wouldn't really apply anymore. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I've
Mm-hmm.
certainly thought about going back to like full-time work versus staying consulting, because
Yeah,
there
yeah.
is a stability to that we don't have as consultants, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, it's a stability there. And so therein lies the trade-offs, right? You know, the
Right, right.
trade-offs of, do I want more flexibility to do this work, but the instability that comes with, you got to provide your own insurance, you got to pay
Right.
yourself, you got
Right.
to, all those things, or the I'm limited in the work, but at least I know that check is coming every 2 weeks
Yep.
and insurance is fine, and if you have a 401k or other benefits and so forth. So it's a trade-off between which one is more important to you at
Mm-hmm.
whatever stage of your life. Now, if I were, you know, earlier on in my life when, trying to grow my family and everything else, I was okay with the limitations of certain things because I needed to take
Mm-hmm.
care of my health and benefits and so forth. I'm at a different stage in life now. So that means that yes, it's important, but at the same time, I value flexibility of my time and other things. And
Yep.
so
Yep.
it's a matter of which one you need in the moment. And looking at, I hate to say pros and cons, but it's true. You do need to look at, what are the positives versus the negatives based on what's most important to you in your life at this time.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
So,
curious about this recovering from DEI, because you know what it made me think of is
mhm.
in sport and in cycling in particular. We talk about
Yes,
active recovery, right? So you've had a
yes,
really
yes, yes,
hard
yes.
run or bike ride, and then the next thing you do is like an easy light workout, because it's active recovery. It's working all that lactic acid
Hmm.
out of your muscles. But it's getting the
Hmm.
blood moving. Um, And so there's that form of recovering from DEI where maybe you're still in it, but you're in it in a different way, kind of like
Mm.
regrouping. But then there's also recovering from DEI where you have actually left, but you have the intention to come back. Um,
Right,
versus
right,
just
right,
you're leaving DEI and you're never touching that thing with a 10-foot pole ever again, right?
right, right,
So
right, right.
when you're thinking about recovering from DEI, how are you conceptualizing it?
Mm. Oh, that's a good question because I think what does, for recovery, uh, I think about kind of attorneys actually, that I have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
attorney friends that are no longer in practicing law, and they always call themselves recovering attorneys because
Okay.
they're recovering from the experience of being an attorney without the intention of going back.
Okay.
And I'm not quite sure how Dr. Sam envisions that recovery piece because some people, just like you were mentioning, active recovery, some people are recovering because they're going to go back to work out, and some people are recovering because they're going to move on to something different. And it
Mm-hmm.
depends on which one that is for you. Some people are like, I'm recovering because I'm gathering strength to go on to my next career or what have
Right.
you. Whereas
Right.
others are like, hey, I'm burnt out with DI and I want to return back. It's what I do, it's what I do best. I just need some time. And so I think that depends on your intentions. You know, it might just be your intention. Some people say, look, I'm out of here. I'm going to write my book and go sit on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Other people are like, I need to recover and then I'll be back.
Yeah, I mean, this is just an extraordinarily difficult time to be working in DEI. So I totally would understand why people are like, I'm going to the beach and I'm writing a book, right?
Hmm. Yep.
But as you previously mentioned, we've got all this retaliation happening. We've got people being fired and their jobs are no longer existing. And so it feels more urgent that
Yeah.
those who can should stay, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
feel like
Hmm.
that's a hard ask depending on where you are in terms of your mental
Exactly.
health, your family situation, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which is why I approach this whole conversation with no judgment at all. I
Right, right.
equally support those who move on and those who stay and those who are in recovery. I support all of it, all of it.
Yeah.
And as you know, I've consistently tried to support people that
Mm-hmm.
are younger than ourselves in the
Right.
field, maybe not by age, but just by experience, where I'm like, we do need you because we want to go
Yeah.
retire. We want to do this type of activism work in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to retire at some point, but I want to retire knowing that this work is still in really great strategic hands. Well,
Yeah.
this is a hard time to come on through. It very much reminds me of like, and this is no disrespect to anyone who lost someone or any of that. This very much feels like the COVID of DEI at this point, because I
Hmm.
remember when I was still working in higher education officially, and I remember our school of health professions, we had everything. We had occupational therapy, we had nurses, we had pre-med, et cetera. And to meet the demand for nurses, CNAs, everything else, we were cranking out nurses a little more quickly during the pandemic because we needed them to get in those hospitals and be in support and those
Yep.
types of things.
Yep.
And I feel like it's the COVID of DEI in a very similar way, in that we need more folks to actually be
Yeah.
in the field or come in the field. Those that are in the field, we need you to move from more entry level, mid level work of programming, celebratory events, and committee work to policy, strategy, advocacy
Right.
work that's
Right.
complex in a different way. And so I want those people.
Yeah.
Come on, we need
Yeah.
you. And so it feels very much like that COVID piece. So yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
feels very similar.
Yeah. I think
Yep.
that's a great point and a great way to end. So if you can
Yeah.
stay, and if you can't stay, find another way to do the
Yes.
work that you feel is needed.
Yes, 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 absolutely. There's
Hmm.
so many ways to approach this work that, like Lisa and I have mentioned, doesn't have to use politicized work or words to
Right.
get the work done. So with that, Lisa, let's wrap up. Let me tell folks how they can reach us. You can always find us at YouTube, Unfazed, Unedited. You can find us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Certainly Instagram at Unfazed Pod, LinkedIn at Unfazed Pod, and then info at unfazedpodcast.com. And so if you forget all that, just go to our website, unfazedpodcast.com. And certainly you can find all of our new shows as well as the old archived shows, right? Because Lisa, we're getting there. We're getting closer and closer to that 200. So I'm excited about that piece of it. But just know that you can find us there. If you liked this week's episode, please continue to like us, subscribe to us, leave a review telling us about anything that you want us to know. We read those, share with your friends, coworkers, or others in this phase of your life. So, Dr. Lisa, until next week.
Until next week.